Welcome to the Built to Lead podcast. Today I have for you a special guest, the man, the myth, the legend, Kelly Stickle. He is a father, a grandfather now, husband, author, pastor, business owner, leader of multiple non-for-profit organizations. 4 books under his belt now. Just recently released his newest one, which I just finished reading this morning with much focus and fanfare as I was under the gun to get it done before this. But yeah, it wasn't hard to stay focused on because it was a lot. It was like you said, it's not a speed read.
It's not a speed read.
It's
no,
pretty
this one's
heavy stuff in there.
A little different than the first 3.
You got to stop every 2 minutes to write something down or contemplate for your life's choices, which I did many times.
That's awesome.
So your new book, Kelly, is called "Let's Take Our Job Back."
Yeah,
and it's something that is actually very near and dear to my heart. The concept. I know you've been preaching that from the pulpit for a while now at church, and it's been very convicting to me as a Christian man and as a business owner. And so I want to start. Just you've been leading church, I think you said for 28 years you've been pastoring, which is a long
Started
time.
when I was 3.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
You don't look a day over 31.
Yeah, perfect. It's awesome.
That's what I tell people how long I've been in business. They look at me like, I don't know about that. It's like, well, I started early.
Yes.
So 28 years in ministry is no small amount of time. And I think for anyone, who hasn't been a pastor, which is most of the people who are listening here, that job is maybe one of the harder jobs in leading a nonprofit or a church, somewhere where you're not necessarily signing people's paychecks that are following you. It's a whole
statistically, they rate pastoring a large church, which ours is pretty large, it ranks anywhere in statistically over the last 20 years between the number 2 and number 3 most difficult job in America. And this is their statistics. The president is number 1, and then it floats back and forth from CEO of a large corporation and a pastor of a large church.
Yeah. And this is one reason I'm having you on here. And I think that people should really appreciate that. As a CEO, I have a lot in common with pastor in the respect of the things that we deal with on the day to day. Yeah. They're very similar jobs in one respect and in another way different. And that's what I was highlighting is that the difference is I sign people's paychecks and I can fire people and I can do I have different powers than a pastor has. You got to convince everyone to follow you who shows up to church and then try and make everyone happy. And the variety of people you deal with, the types of people you deal with, you get given a flock of people to deal with where I pick mine.
Yeah. And the other difference, and I had a pastor once tell me this because I was lamenting on how difficult the job was at a time. And he says, really, when you have 2,000 people attending, you've got 2,000 employees. The only difference is that you're not paying them to stay there. Yeah. And they can vote anytime they want to leave or go or be upset. And they don't, to them, it's very little consequence. To you, it can be a big consequence. So when I saw it from that perspective, I was like, oh that makes sense. Leading nonprofits is a little bit different. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm trying to remember the book now and it's just not coming to me, but I've read, if you ever want to test your leadership mettle, go run a completely volunteer-based group.
True.
Because if you're a good leader, you can do that. If you're a mediocre leader, you will struggle hard in a volunteer scenario. Absolutely. And I totally get it. Like it's a really different thing. And so I think obviously anyone who's pastoring a large church is a good leader. And I think you're a great leader, Kelly.
Appreciate that.
And so your opinion is super valid. And in listening to podcasts and other guys out there that are leading, like Stephen Furtick, Craig Rochelle, some of these other big guys, their leadership advice has been instrumental to me running my business. And so trying to bring your opinions and your thoughts to this podcast is, I think, going to be really, really great for everyone who's listening.
Well, I appreciate it. And it's great to be here. Big fan of this podcast. So excited to weigh in today, have a conversation.
So just to start out, obviously you said you've been pastoring for 28 years. Do you want to give us a bit of just a rundown of your uptick and your leadership journey kind of to where we are now?
Yeah. So right after I graduated from high school, my big dream was was gonna be a rock star. I was gonna be a musician. Music was my big focus. And surprisingly enough, 1 month after I graduated from high school, I attended an outdoor festival of which my favorite band was headlining, and my dad's best friend was the MC at the concert. And so he invited me backstage to meet my favorite band, and I was like, great. So we started the conversation backstage, and then my dad's best friend slaps me on the back and says, hey, why don't you ask these guys how to get into the music business? And they're like, you're a musician? I was like, yeah. And they're like, what do you play? And I was like, well, I'm a bass player. And they're like, really? Tonight's our bass players last night. Sit down. And handed me a guitar and said, play me something. So I played something, and they're like, hey, you're hired. And I ended up touring with my favorite band for just over 2 years.
That's awesome.
And it was a dream come true, and thought, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. This is amazing.
So what band is it?
It was Doug Rawling and the Fourth Watch. They were previously known as Cross Section. So they were, signed Christian band at the time, but they were signed under major labels. It was Sony. And so that was, it was a dream come true.
Legit. It's cool.
And then once that came to a screeching halt, when we had a battle with our label and all that good fun stuff, the business part of it,
stuff,
more normal band stuff, business stuff that went down, I ended up going back to my hometown. That's when I started attending Bible college, met my wife. And then we ended up being plucked out of Bible college a little bit early to go and help with a brand new church plant in Canmore as the musicians, kind of the music leaders there. And a year and a half into that position at that church, the lead pastor said, hey, I'm going to go plant another church. The church is yours. And I was 22 when he told me that. And I was like, now I got to lead a church. I had no dream whatsoever of ever pastoring. That's actually one thing that I swore I'd never do. I didn't like church and definitely didn't want to lead one. I thought that'd be the worst job on the planet. So when I got handed one, I was like, I'm going to refuse. And I felt, no, okay, we're going to do this, and started leading that church. And I went to a group of pastors and asked for mentorship. I said, I have no idea how to do this. I've never thought about doing this. Could you mentor me and teach me how to do that? And the response I got from that group was read a book. That was the response. They're like, we don't want to mentor. You're like, read a book. And I was like, what?
That's like a little bit ouch.
Yeah. I was like, for real?
Trial by fire for sure.
So I did actually. I was like, okay, well, I'll go get a book. And one of the first books that I read was John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, so which is one of his best.
It is, honestly.
It is.
It's amazing.
It's an amazing book. And I saw it on your shelf back there. But
we just went through with our leadership team 2 books ago, I think.
Yeah, it's so good. But the Law of the Lid got my attention. And Law of the Lid, for those who might not know, is he says if you rate your leadership out of a scale of 1 to 10, he said, so let's say you rate yourself, you're a 6. You will never be able to lead anyone in your organization higher than a 5. And
do you know how many times I've said that to my groups of leaders as I was leading? And do you know what? When I read that the first time, which I probably read that in my early 20s.
Yeah.
The first time.
Me too.
And I was like, yeah, it's just literally, right? And I was like, oh, like light bulb goes on. I got to become way better, because if I'm not an 8 or 9, I'm never going to be able to get the people that I need.
Absolutely.
Oh, such a powerful
thing. It was life transforming, because I looked at that. I looked at my congregation and I thought, okay, I'll rate myself maybe as a 5 as a leader. I wasn't even close, because I looked at my congregation. It was a very small church, and everybody in my congregation at that time was unemployed or like lower end business. No business owners, no leaders. I was like, that means I'm probably a 3. Like, if I'm going to be honest, I looked at that.
Look around you and see what you got going on.
None of them were watching, because they all grew. But I was like, I need to grow myself. This is bad. I'm never going to be able to attract anybody. We're not financially going to be able to survive. We're not going to be able to make any difference. We're not going to grow. So I decided that I was going to put myself on a very heavy self-development plan. And so I did. And so I decided I would listen.
Just stop you here quickly. To go back to that, it's so huge. I don't want people to miss that you need to put it into yourself. And until you figure that out, you just can't progress. And the thing I wanted to point out too is like the interesting thing is like I went to people to ask them to mentor me.
Right.
What you said.
Yep.
And I think about when people come to me asking me that kind of thing, I say the same thing as they said.
Yeah.
And you probably wouldn't argue with that either. Yeah. Like, how did I grow? I read and I read and I read to put in the work. Yep. And it's partly that they got to put in the work. I can't believe how hard it is to get people to read books within our organization, within giving people advice. I hand people books all the time.
It's
and
the
they
easiest
never
time ever to read a book because you got Audible books, you got Kindles, you got physical books. So people saying, well, I don't read. Listen to Audible.
Then I don't read. I don't, whatever. You're never, ever going to grow and progress.
That's true.
If you don't put the effort into it. And it's not just like you said, it's easier than it's ever been.
Yep.
But it's more available than it's been.
Absolutely.
And everything. If you're listening to this, you need to read books.
Absolutely.
You need to read. I could pound your head against a book right now. Read the book. Read the book. You have to read the books. I've read hundreds of books, and I kid you not, and I'm sure you've read hundreds and maybe thousands of books.
Yep.
And I would attribute 75-80% of my knowledge and growth as a person to reading books.
Absolutely. And I would say the same. So my development plan, I was like, I'm going to do something daily, weekly, monthly, yearly to grow my leadership.
Perfect.
So daily, it was this was way back in the late 90s. So before podcasts were a thing, literally, I ordered leadership CDs I would pick top leaders that I wanted to be like or emulate. And I listened to a leadership, it'd be a CD, MP3 until podcasts came out. I listened. So daily I listened to a podcast. Weekly I read a book. Monthly I sat down with a leader who's gone further than me and came with a list of questions. I didn't wait for them to tell me what they knew. I came prepared with questions. And yearly I went to a conference or to a leadership event of some sort of something that I wanted to emulate. And I've done that, Jory, I've done that for 28 years. Listen daily, read weekly, and all.
I was going to recap that because that plan right there is simple. Simple. But that is like the playbook for personal growth.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people go, well, it's too simple. Like Christianity say the same thing, but it's too simple. And no, it really is that simple. Listen, read, go to conferences, talk to mentors.
Yep.
It's 4 things.
That's
all it is.
4 things.
Do that. And to this day, I do a core 4, which I've talked about a lot on here.
Yep.
That's what my core 4, half of it is that stuff.
Yep.
And like scheduling it into my schedule to make sure I'm not missing out on it.
Absolutely.
And it's huge. It's humongous. Like you move.
The
so
impact
fast.
was remarkable. So I looked at my congregation, had to rate myself as a 3, put in the plan of leadership development in myself. 18 months later, our church had doubled. I had a core of major business leaders, not like major CEOs, major corporations. I had an NFL player that was an active NFL player, professional athlete that he and his family attended our church. And I had leading politicians come in there. And that was 18 months after growing myself. And I was like, okay, I got to keep up. And I was like, these people started coming in order for me to keep them. I got double down on this plan and began working it. And we pastored there for 10 years. Did really well. We decided, hey, if we're going to do this church thing, we're going to go into a community where we feel like, Canmore is very transient. And so we would raise leaders, and then, people would come in there. The average person lived in Canmore 2 years. They'd come and make their money and then gone, which we had a lot of people in the church, you raise up leaders and then boom, well, we're moving away. So I was like, I want to anchor somewhere, basically as a test of my leadership, to say, can we grow and keep something? And that. So we planted a church just south of Calgary in Okotoks, started from scratch. That thing exploded and went really well, and was there 5 years. And then we ended up being asked to come to Lethbridge to take over the church that we're pastoring now. That was 13 years ago. And in that, we were basically taking over an organization that was within 6 months of bankruptcy. Its tenants was virtually nothing. And it was struggling and really, really bad and dying. And so we were kind of platooned in here really quickly as a rescue project, which was a lot of fun in leadership. to be able to say, okay, and I've started an organization. Now I'm taking over, and I'm like having to rebuild.
You're doing a turnaround.
And doing a turnaround. And I was like, okay, and that excited me. Okay, here's a challenge, what we're going to do. But we were able to take what we learned and all the years of reading and growing. And honestly, a lot of the books that I read are, people say, well, you're a pastor, so you read church Christian books.
Or just straight theology all day. Right?
Yeah, all three. I was like, no. The majority of books that I read are leadership, business, communication, communication, not just on being a public speaker, although I've read many books on that, but on communicating within staff and within things, because my role as a pastor in a large church is I'm a CEO. I'm running in charge of finances and books and projections and bottom line, working through all of that. I run a fairly large staff, right? So I'm working with staff and with people all the day. There's management stuff on there. But then we're also acquiring buildings, and we're also expanding and raising up leaders. And we're also running not-for-profits, like you said, multiple of them that we've launched from there. So, we took over the church in Lethbridge. It was about 250 that were in weekly attendance, losing $10,000 a month, to now where we are, around 2,000 in attendance, 6 different locations, and started 3 other nonprofits. Mm-hmm. So
having wild, fast uptick too in some cases, right?
Yes.
And again, you list all the things you're responsible for. Very, very similar, parallel to what I'm doing every day.
Absolutely.
The difference is that I have staff and you have some staff and mostly volunteers.
Yes.
That you're leading, right?
Well, and the other challenge we have is in church world, because we are basically the vast majority of our income is based on donation. Mm-hmm. So therefore, we have staff that we can't competitively pay at the same rate as what most businesses do. So now you have to have you need to have high quality staff because you're running a large organization, and you need
that work for cheap
and or cheaper. And you're going, okay, how do we do this? How do we make the budget? And so, or we pay, and this is what we've chose to do, is that we pay as competitively as we possibly can, and we minimize our staff, and we empower and work through volunteers.
Make them do more. And do more with less all the time. And then your income is also, like, you're not publicly traded, maybe worse technically, because your shareholders are everybody who's been in the church, right? Absolutely. So everyone now has an opinion of what you should do and how you should do with your money.
Yes.
So you're even more handcuffed again in how you lead and how you do things, right? Not completely, but at the same time, there's a lot more opinions flying around than in a typical business.
Right. And I have to be crystal clear as a leader. One thing I discovered is I have to be so crystal clear as a leader in our vision and our purpose, where we're going, because people don't give to need, they give to vision. And I have to be so crystal clear, not just to my staff, but I have to be crystal clear to our clients, to the community, to the people that are attending, in order to grow the thing. I have to be so clear in why we exist and what we do and why we're doing it and why we do it a certain way that people are going to say, no, this is, we're in, and we want to be a part of this. Yeah.
And that's something that I always think and honor in pastors, is just that they have so many more constraints and so much more. Like they are held to a high standard and have to stay really sharp to be successful, right? People can show up to our business, hopefully not, and be disengaged, come here, get their paycheck, and go home, and still do the bidding of the business.
Yeah.
Not so at church.
No, it's so true.
You lose them, their engagement, they're gone.
They're gone.
Right? You won't even
there's
necessarily
nothing you can
know
do about that. Yeah. And there's nothing you can do about it. So.
Yeah. So it's different, which I think just means even a way higher standard of leadership is required.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so taking all of that, besides doing the church world and stuff, taking all of the reading and the podcast and mentorship and learning, and diving into leadership and really living in that world, it's now a place where I've started a business where I'm now coaching. The reason why I started that business is because I was coaching for, some major corporations that would bring me in and saying, hey, would you come and teach our staff? Would you come and teach this? Something from one of my books, or something from something that they heard me say. I do so many leadership teaching, coaching different things with our staff on a monthly basis, and empower them and work through them and stuff like that. So somebody would come and attend one of those or something like that. Hey, you got to come and tell their boss, and hey, you got to come and do this. So I was like, it's interesting when you input, all of a sudden I was like, okay, there's stuff that we can contribute on a much larger basis than just my world. I can now begin to affect and help grow others too.
Yeah, 100%. Which is, again, you build the systems, you build the structure, you do the learning, you put all the effort and the time in, and then you realize, a lot like this podcast for me is like, wow, this has huge value outside of my own little thing here. Yeah, I can multiply this for other people and help solve problems, which is great. Put value out.
Absolutely.
Right?
No, absolutely.
Cool. So leveraging it into other things. I want to get into the book a little bit, because I like the trend that you're on right now, the direction you're going, and what you think about the church. And so, the Let's Take Our Job Back is the name of the book, and that's kind of the theme throughout the book. But the thing that really strikes me, and the thing you've been really pounding lately, is the concept of ecclesia.
Yeah.
So can you talk to us about ecclesia?
Ecclesia is, it's interesting because one of the things, the reason why I did the book is it started in COVID and the church's response or lack of their response to COVID and confusion as to what we're supposed to do and what role we're supposed to play. And so I was like, man, I need to do some study in church history. Let's go back to our roots and discover, what we were, what we started, why we're doing what we're doing, because it seems like our purpose is waning. So as the Big C church. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to study into history. In that study, I discovered that the word church was never in the Bible. And I went, wait, what? That was actually inserted
in the background. Like, what?
Exactly. That word was actually inserted and put into the Bible by translators in the 1400s. So it was, and they would use that word. It originates from a German word, Kirch. So it has nothing to do with Hebrew, Greek. It was a German word, Kirch, which means temple or synagogue, or basically a building to be a part of. And I was like, okay, well, what was the word? What was the word that Jesus used when he said, I will build my church? He didn't say, I will build my church. What did he say?
Fairly key statement.
Pretty key statement. My church. I will build my church.
Like how much have we talked about that in all Christian circles forever?
Forever.
Yeah.
Right? And Jesus was announcing his vision and his mission, what he was purposely wanting to do, and it wasn't church. And I was like, oh, so he didn't say, I will build my synagogue, I will build my temple, I will build my movement of temples. He didn't say that. He used the word ecclesia, which, fascinating enough, ecclesia is not a religious term whatsoever. Ecclesia was a business term used in Greece. It was actually a political term used in Rome. So it was a common term in that time of the world. And so when he said it to his followers, people are following Jesus because he's a rabbi, he's a religious leader, and he goes, hey, my mission is I'm going to build this ecclesia. And they're going, no, wait, what? Because they understood, and he didn't really define it too much, but they understood ecclesia. And here's what ecclesia means originally. It means it's a social political gathering of citizens who meet over the concerns of their city. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wait.
So let that sink in for a second. If you're listening right now, like a socio,
it's a business term
of people,
or a political term. It's a social gathering, a social political gathering of citizens. So it can be a gathering of citizens. 2 or 3 is the Roman thing. 2 or 3 would gather, and they would meet over the concern. So it could be political, and it could be a council meeting over, city council meeting over. That would be called the ecclesia. It could be a group of business leaders who are saying, hey, we need to make our community better, and we're going to input in this way.
Be a neighborhood group.
It could be a neighborhood group that we're going to make our neighborhood better. Whatever it might be, that's the term he used, and that's what he said he was going to build. And I began to think on that and went, wait, it's a church is not a place I go to. A church is not the building that we meet in. A church is not necessarily just the congregation or a specific congregation. The church is a gathering of citizens who meet for the purpose of their city,
and not even people who follow a lead pastor, like, because that's another part that Absolutely. Has been really contemplative things. Like, yeah, we all know it's not the building. We're the church. Us as a group. But then we go, okay, but we're following someone in the church. No, that's not it.
Yeah.
It's a gathering of people who care about their neighbors.
Absolutely.
And their city.
And what's fascinating, the reason why the word church was inserted is exactly what you're alluding to, is it was inserted and it was reinforced by King James in the King James Bible. He actually wrote 15, and I encourage people to look this up if they're curious, but he wrote 15 objectives to the translators that he wanted to translate what we now have as the King James Bible. One of the requirements, or there's two that indicated it, three that kind of hinted on it. One was very specific, that they could not use the word ecclesia. They had to use the word church. And I was like, why was that such a big deal?
Particular?
Why so particular? Why, like he said, translate, like one of the objectives was translate it as close to the original as you possibly can, except for this word. Mm-hmm. And I went, well, why is that such a big deal?
So, and even going back to having read this in your book, the guy who originally translated it to English,
William Tyndale. Yeah.
William Tyndale. So he translated it, puts it out to the world essentially.
Yep.
And they arrest him.
And
they said, no.
They burned him at the stake. Yeah.
Well, they initially didn't feel the church and state are really intertwined at this point in time.
Yes.
Like they're controlling the masses.
Yes.
And so when he translated it, it became available for the average person to read, which they didn't want, right?
So they didn't want it available to everybody to read, but the main thing that they were concerned about, and this was King James' main concern, because at that time the church was the church and state were intertwined. And in England to this day, the king is the head of the Church of England. Mm-hmm. And so when Tyndale, and he did it, this was 80 to 100 years before King James, and that he lived and killed and all the rest of it. And interesting, they still used the majority of his translation, which is
I think it said 87% of what he translated they used.
They used, except for this one.
After they killed him.
Yes. And this is why King James wanted the word church in there, because church meant top-down organizational leadership, top-down, of which he was the head. And so when he said, you have to use that, because if they used the Tyndale's translation, and if they used Jesus's translation of ecclesia, it gave power to the people and removed the organization. It created a movement, and it removed the organizational structure, of which it would have removed him as the head of the church.
Is control, manipulation.
Yeah.
Religion.
Yeah. So when I discovered this, I was like, whoa.
Yeah, let's back it up like 2,000 years.
Yeah, let's back this truck up because we got a major problem, because we operate off the premise of that we're building a church. I've operated off of the premise that I'm building a church. I'm building an organization, top down. Mm-hmm. I'm the lead pastor. Everybody's got to follow me. All the rest of it. And I was like, wait, but that's not what Jesus intended. And leading an organization is one level of complexity. Leading a movement, that's totally different.
Yeah. And so in your book, you go into this, and I think now is a good point to get to, like, what the difference between movements and organizations. And again, I want to always tie this back to business, because this is a business and leadership podcast.
Yeah.
So as I call my business an organization, and yet by your definition, I don't really want it to be. And so kind of do that explanation.
Yeah. So I read an article years ago. I think it was published in 2015. I encourage business leaders to look it up, but Harvard Business Review did an article, the difference between a movement and an organization. And I thought it was so very, very applicable to what we do in the church, but it's Harvard Business Review. It's applicable to business. And one of the things that they said, and let's just keep it in business world for a second, is they said there was a move, and there is a movement towards in 2015, and we see the evidence of that towards movement style businesses rather than top down organizational style. And they said there's going to be a major shift. So since that time, we've seen things like Uber, right, which is more movement style. It's base roots. Like there's a concept, but it's more movement. Like Uber doesn't control. They don't own all the vehicles. They're not.
Yeah, they're not trying to command and control as much.
Right.
And this is where I like how in my lingo I go mission and vision, is that they're putting it all on the mission and the vision.
And they put a whole lot of trust.
Mm-hmm.
They're putting an enormous amount of trust on drivers that aren't their employees, like
that they can't control.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's like, whoa. And that's movement, because movement, the difference between organizations are top down, CEO, or, everything flows from the top down. Organizations are all about the organization, and that's
order and keeping things tight and controlled, command and control.
Yes. Right. And that's what so think Coca-Cola, think, big businesses, top CEO, the CEO makes an enormous amount of money, has an enormous amount of control, that kind of thing. And that's the majority of businesses out there. We're seeing a major swing toward the movement style, where the movements are about the mission, where the organization's about the organization and staying alive and staying afloat. Movements are really about a mission. So Uber's like, okay, or skip the dishes, or you pick it. Like,
well, and if you go into it too, customers and employees connect with movements.
Yeah.
They're buying a feeling. They're following a leader. They're not like the corporation and the big, rich, wealthy CEOs and all these things. They're not vibing with that.
No,
they don't like it. They're sick of it, frankly. And these elites and rich people, and again, not going way too down the political range, but people are sick of that. They want authenticity.
Yes.
They want purpose.
Yes.
They want meaning. They want it to be something that matters. They want to engage with it.
Yep.
They want to be driven by purpose and fulfillment and all these types of things.
People want the why more than the what.
Amen. And that is really what the difference between being an organization and being a movement is. Your mission and your vision are what drives you, not the bottom line.
Right.
And making, and how I say it in our world is that I don't run this business to make myself or my family rich. I run it to build God's kingdom, the community. And God's kingdom is about his people.
Yes.
Right. And
Absolutely.
So when it comes down to how do I put value out to my community? How do I put value out to our employees? How do I put value out to my customers? Mm-hmm. We're creating a movement.
Absolutely.
Right? That's the goal anyway.
Now, let's be clear. Movements are still organized.
Yes, 100%. It's not like, oh, chaos is good.
Right. Movements require leadership. Movements require managers. Movements require, there are still people that need to do the work, get the work done. But they're driven not by just keeping the organization afloat. They're driven by, hey, we've got a purpose, we've got a problem to solve. This is our vision, this is our mission in our area of business or expertise that we're doing, and that's what drives us. Not necessarily I'm doing it because I'm afraid.
Misinterpret that organization is bad. No, organization is good. Organizations or the business or the top-down leadership or the the bottom line profit, corporate America, blah 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 thing is the problem. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, Uber is Uber organized. They're crazy organized, but they have they don't have the command and control. They've handed off, but they're very clear with their
and they govern themselves based on their mission and their vision for what they're doing, not on making somebody rich. And I'm not saying someone's not getting rich at Uber. Someone is. But the big picture is not that. Yeah. Right. When you're doing the right thing and you're adding value to your community and your customers, your employees, profit comes. It's part of the equation.
Yep.
Business at the end of the day makes money. It's what they do. If there's no money being made, there's no business that exists. And so you can paint that with an evil brush or whatever, but at the end of the day, if there's no money being made, this doesn't exist. Right. Right. And so you just face that reality. But the counterintuitive part is that we create a movement, and profit is a symptom of that movement.
Yep,
right.
Absolutely.
And the ones that move fast, like the ones that have exploded in the last decade, are movements, and they're worth billions and trillions of dollars now.
Explosive growth. Yeah.
Think Tesla, think Apple, think Google, Uber. These guys, it's again, people are very, very rich from it, and it as they grow and as things, more power and control gets put there, then things get tainted. Humans are going to taint everything eventually.
Well, let's date ourselves for a moment here. Think Blockbuster versus Netflix. Mm-hmm. Right? One owned all these buildings, organization, CEO, top down. Netflix, the CEO still organized in many ways, but it's more movement based, more or less less product.
It's about what they do and not about what they're worth.
Yeah.
Right. Totally. Which is huge. And I think that's great. Let's talk in this section where we talked about blame and excuses, and how we abdicate being in charge of that.
So when Jesus said, ecclesia, it was a movement he was talking about, social political gathering of citizens who met over the concerns of their city. So I began to think on that, and I was like, man, like, I think we have two major diseases in our society today. We cast blame and we make excuses. So everybody seems to be blaming everybody else. Just
scroll any social media.
Yeah. Or
it's just
pay attention to the recent American election. Like, what was the rhetoric back and forth? Everyone's blaming.
Well, they get more traction when they do that. That's the even crazier part, is that we eat it for breakfast.
We eat it, yeah. So, but we watch people, and we watch business leaders. I watch all sort of citizens and say, okay, I blame the government. I blame the economy. I blame this. And what I realized is that whenever we cast blame, wherever we cast blame, we assign responsibility. And responsibility is basically the sum of two words. It's response and ability. So whoever we cast blame to, we assign the response ability, or the ability to respond to that problem. So let's say we blame the government for why our business is struggling, and we say, why the economy is bad, and we say it's the government's fault. And, they've got responsibility for sure. But when we cast all blame on them, we assign all responsibility to them. Or other words, we assign all ability to respond to them as well. And we basically make the excuse and take ourselves out of the equation. So I had this thought, and this was the premise in the book, when Jesus said to this little ragtag group of followers that he had, hey, my vision is I'm going to build an ecclesia, a socially political group of citizens who meet over the concerns of the city. I was like, wait, it wasn't a church building. He didn't say go out there and build church buildings. We
better start putting up buildings here.
Yeah, he didn't say any of that. He said, I want you to gather. I want you to take care of the concerns of the city. And then he assigned in Matthew 25. Then he begins to assign to them and says, hey, when you see hungry, feed them. When you see thirsty, give. And that was the major drive of the early church, to such a degree. And get this, and I put this in the book as well, but it shocked me that in the 4th century, Julius the Apostate, who was the emperor in 364 AD, actually wrote a letter to one of his high priests. And in that letter, he says, hey, we got to start giving too, because these Galileans, which he was referred to as the Christians, the church basically in that day, they're out giving us. I was like, wait, Christians by the 4th century were out giving the Roman Empire? And he says they take care of their poor, and not only their poor, but ours too.
It's disgraceful.
And they make they're making us look bad. And I was like, wait. So they literally took Jesus's mandate and created a movement of saying, hey, we're going to meet about the concerns of our city. They didn't assign blame or make excuses as to why they couldn't make a difference and why they didn't, and what was shocking to me is that the majority of the early church, 1st century, were part of the lower class. That's where it started and kind of birthed out of there, from the lower class. So they weren't uber rich, but yet they were out giving an empire within 4 centuries. And I was like, my goodness. And
like heavily persecuted. Like it's illegal to be a Christian. You're being literally executed. They're running in during plagues to help people who are dying and dying themselves. Like they were just in the worst situation to be a Christian, and grew the most in the midst of it.
In the midst of that, they grew the most. So why did they grow the most? Because they were the epicenter of hope. And I was like, the most valuable currency on the planet today is hope. So let's put this in the business world now, and so, because ecclesia is a business term, hope is, that's not just a church term. Like, that's not church Christian. Let's just put it in the business world. If you want to attract more customers, if you want to attract favor, right? If you become a business that takes care of the concerns of your city in and around there, like, it's amazing what will happen with your business. I had a friend of ours Gene Brack. You remember Pastor Gene? He just moved down to Arkansas. Mm-hmm. He's telling me the city he's living in is the city that where Walmart's headquarters are. Yeah. And he said this city is unbelievable. It has the most amazing museum that's free for everybody. It has the most amazing parks and paths and sports. He's like, I've never seen a city with more, resources and more, like, it's nice and clean and state of the art and amazing. And I was like, well, what's the deal? Arkansas, like, what's the deal? Well, Walmart's here and they paid for it all. Mm-hmm. They took care. They changed their city.
I love this, and I want to hit on this as you go. Okay, when a business resides in a city, and that business is very successful, often that's, like you said, the city's beautiful. But the thing that people aren't thinking about, and as a business owner, you're not probably thinking about, is the chicken before the egg aspect of this.
Right.
Right. Why was the business so successful that it could pay for these things?
Well, yeah.
Because it served the customer first. It thinks about things in this way. They go, okay, well, if I put value to my customer and they get good value for the money they spend, then I'm going to make money in my business.
Yes.
If I put value to my community, they're going to buy into my business because they know I care about them. It's not just about the bottom line. And if you read about Walmart and Walton, what's his first name? Sam Walton, and just who he was as a person, as a man, is like, he cared a lot about community, about America, about his employees. He put his care, and he built ecclesia.
He did exactly what ecclesia is as a business owner, right? He spent hundreds of millions of dollars making his city better.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, like I'm going, okay, like, you could have used that money, put it in your estate. You could have used that money, like, and built more Walmart. Like, you could have used that money, but he wasn't about the organization as much as he was about saying, hey, I'm gonna take care of the concerns of my city. I'm gonna make my city better. And I was like, man.
Well, and I don't know about you. Again, I'm just processing this kind of in my own mind right now. But when I walk into Walmart, I don't think this company is clearly all about making more profit for itself.
Right.
Because, again, they're not the fanciest buildings.
Nope.
They have what we need. They're trying to give you the lowest price, which was always the mandate of Walmart. Sometimes there's a lot of weird people around in pajamas, right? But they don't get the impression of self-serving.
Yeah.
They're here to be the most convenient, cheapest place. And the people who need their stuff cheaply, the lowest of these, have access to it at Walmart.
Absolutely.
And so then when you look at that, you go, why do you think they're so freaking successful?
Exactly. Well, and this mentality, think about this. Sam Walton could have easily said, hey, I'm a big deal. Walmart's a big deal. And point the finger as to the city and say, hey, you guys should clean up the city. You should make it better because we're important. Mm-hmm. He didn't cast blame, and he didn't make excuses as to why it wasn't his job to do it.
Well, and what's the normal thing that we say? Well, I pay this many tax dollars, and this is what you should be doing with it.
You should be doing it.
Not, I'm going to take responsibility. It's the blame and excuses thing. It's like, either I can cast blame and say this, or I can take responsibility and do something about it.
Absolutely.
Right. And this is where I think, again, I'm trying to point out in business, this is like, as business owners, we need to stop pointing, blaming, making excuses, and take responsibility for yourself. And this also cascades into last podcast, which you would have gotten last month on leading through adversity, is that denying the brutal facts, denying and making excuses and blaming others, is you're just taking the power away from yourself to actually make real change. Absolutely. And your success is on the other side of that.
Yeah, I like to say that excuses are kryptonite. Like Superman had his kryptonite, which stripped him of all his power. Excuses do that. They strip us of all of our power to make a difference, to make a change. Mm-hmm. And so when we make excuses and we say, well, we would grow, we would do this if it wasn't for our competition, if it wasn't for the economy, if it wasn't for our customers, if it wasn't for, and we make all the excuses, which immediately removes any power for us to make a change. And the real leaders, like leaders as a whole, they will take responsibility and they will accept the blame, and they'll say, hey, I'm responsible for this. I'm going to make a difference, and I'm not making excuses. I'm going to
look in the mirror.
I'm going to look in the mirror. I'm going to make change here first.
And it works.
It works.
Right. But it's not easy though. That's the thing. It's like you can say it, but doing it's a whole nother thing. Right? It pays fruit in the long run, but you got to be legit.
Absolutely.
To do that. Another thing I wanted to get into here is in your book, there's a line in there and it really impacted me. It's nothing I've ever heard before, but I really liked it. And it was that we as humans have it in our DNA to rule, and that we're looking for authority and power. And that is not ultimately wrong. It's the way that we were made, that way that God made us. And it's something I have to say that like it's troubled me for a long time, because there is a bit of a narrative, not even just like in our country, but in Christianity, money's evil, power is evil, great power corrupts, all these types of things. And so then you feel like it's a flesh issue or a sinful issue, that you desire to have control, that you desire to build and to grow and to build an empire. Like as a business owner, you almost feel like it's sinful to want to build bigger and to grow more and to make all this money and do all these big things. And it's really like, can be a bit condemning at times.
Absolutely.
But the way that you framed it and worded it was really interesting. So speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. So power is just a tool, just like money's a tool, right? So money is not right or wrong, evil or good. It depends on what you use it for. Power in and of itself is a tool. It's not evil. It's not good. It's whatever you make it to be, like however you use the tool. So the reason why I made that statement is because we often make excuses as to, well, I can't, I'm not, and it's not my I have no power, I have no ability. Or we dismiss ourselves, or we allow others to dismiss us as unable, incapable. But then, like when you read Genesis 1 in the Bible, one of the first things God does and says to Adam and Eve when He's created them, He says, "Have power and dominion. I give you power and dominion over the garden." And I was like, wait, He gave them power, He gave them dominion, He instructed them to rule, to make it better. And I was like, and then you all throughout the Bible, you see, for instance, Jeremiah 11, which is often quoted in Christian circles, right? I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and give you future and hope. The verses before all of that is the prophet, speaking on behalf of God to the people and saying, hey, you're in Babylon, you're in captivity, you're here, you're going to be here a while. He's warning him all this. He says, while you're here, make your city better. Have dominion, prosper the city, make the city better, because then I have plans for you, and I will prosper you, and I'll make you, and you'll have a future and a hope when they go to work and have dominion wherever they're planted, even in a city that conquered them and there's evil.
Yeah, where they're exiled and more or less in slavery.
Right. So go wherever you go and plant. So I think just look at history and all the rest of it. The Jewish people took God's word and still to this day tend to prosper, tend to lead, tend to rule, tend to and plant wherever they are and prosper where they are.
Yeah.
And we see all that and going, we as human beings need to realize that, hey, ruling, prospering, succeeding, growing, we are called to rule, and we are called to have dominion, and we're called to build, and we're called to grow. That's all built within our DNA. That's in there. When we turn that and we turn the motives to selfishness, or we turn the motives to this, we end up controlling, right? And we end up commanding, and we get into the place where we are thinking that, well, I've got power, I've got rule. Now I'm stepping over you because I'm built to rule, and I'm going to step on you because I'm built to rule. And Jesus was very evident. He said,
you clarified this in the book, and I really love this too, which you're getting towards here, is that there's God's way of ruling, and then there's a sinful, selfish man's way of ruling, and then you differentiate them, and it's clear as day from a biblical standpoint. But it also has consequences, and basically how you said is God's way is loving and serving, and man's way is complacent, compassionless, compromising, commanding and controlling, focusing on our comfort and coin, which is our own financial gain, right? And to say it even more simply, one is selfless and one is selfish.
Right. So let me give you just a really humorous way, but just let this sink in for a while. The difference between command and control and using power for evil, and the difference between Jesus's way of using power and influence for good. So Jesus told his leaders, "You want to be the greatest of all, you need to be a servant." And he told them to serve up. Use your power, use your influence to serve from the bottom up, and to serve your customers, to serve your people, to serve people, to fix your city, all this kind of stuff. Rome had the command and control, top down. We're gonna be fear-based. We're gonna control. We're gonna power. We're gonna dominate. We're gonna intimidate, kill. Here's the point that I'm gonna make, that kind of humorous, but it makes the point of what is more effective, is the fact that we name our children Peter and John and Mark and Matthew, and we name our cats, dogs, Caesar.
Yeah. Well, and even the Roman Empire doesn't exist now.
And the Roman Empire doesn't.
And the church, the ecclesia, the group of the followers of Jesus.
Well, think about this. The very empire that tried to squash Christianity for centuries is the epicenter of the Catholic Church, the Vatican, is the epicenter of ancient Christianity, like to this day. And going, can you imagine like telling, Peter the disciple, who ends up being crucified as well by the Roman Empire, that right before there, hey, one day there's going to be a massive, one of the biggest churches, physical churches in the entire world, is going to be built in your name in the city of Rome.
Peter's Basilica, right?
Like, come on.
Yeah. It's ironic, right? Like when you look at it in the big picture.
Yeah.
And so, and it totally applies to business in the respect of how I try to lead, which is through loving and serving and selflessness, versus selfish leadership and top-down command and control and that kind of thing. Yeah, it might succeed for a while or in the short term, but one endures and one ends.
Yes.
Always. It leads to it.
And that's the big difference. So let's not move past that too quickly. Fear is effective. Command and control is effective.
Yeah.
Typically for a short period of time. And I think we've all worked for bosses, or we've been in a place where it was intimidating and fear was there. And it worked for a while, but eventually we get disheartened, we get whatever, we shut down, and it doesn't endure. And it's effective in the short term, but long term, it's never sustainable.
Yeah, and you even look at like slavery and dictatorships and communism, these things that they all eventually crater.
Absolutely.
Right? Because they're human ways of commanding and control.
Absolutely.
Right? Awesome. So segueing that, so the DNA rule, which is, again, it was an enlightening statement to me to go, hey, it's not evil that you want to build big things and that you're an entrepreneur and that you have big dreams and big wants and big desires. In the book later on, you kind of do a three-dimensional aspect of how God wants our lives to be. And they use the description of the city and heaven and earth, like when God remakes heaven and earth, and some of the descriptions of what that looks like, to basically say, hey, it's three-dimensional. God builds things three-dimensionally. Yeah. And then the metaphor leads into us being individuals three-dimensional, and having a three-sided and balanced approach to our selfish ambition, serving God's people and humanity, and then having a relationship with God. Yeah. Which I thought was a really great thing. Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so that thought it's fascinating. Revelation 21 gives like very descriptive vision of heaven, including measurements. And I was like, well,
yeah, it's kind of like, why?
Like, why would that matter? And it's like, it's three, like, it's the height is the same as the length and as the width. And it's like, okay, so why? Like, why is that important? And it was Martin Luther King that spoke a message on that in the 50s. And he said, that's because God wants us to be, and that's where I kind of launched off of that part, is God wants us to be three-dimensional. And we're three-part beings. We're body, we are mind, will, and emotions, and we have spirits. And we're the only creation. People say, well, we're just like animals. I haven't met a Buddhist cat yet, or a Muslim monkey. Like, they have no spiritual being. They're two-part, where we're three-part. And we make the mistake, I think, when we begin to focus on, we get one-dimensional. We get so focused, let's just say, in our own personal success in business, that we end up choosing to cheat. Like we cheat something else. If we focus in here, we lose our health, we lose our family, maybe we lose respect, like whatever it might be, recreation, whatever it might be. We're going to sacrifice something. The most effective people are the ones that are three-dimensional. We're saying, okay, I'm going to be a builder. I'm going to build myself, which is what we began the podcast talking about is, hey, I'm going to have a personal growth plan. I'm going to input in myself, and I'm going to build myself, and I'm going to,
Built to Lead is the name of the podcast.
Built
That's
to
what
Lead.
We're working on ourselves,
We're
right?
working ourselves. We're built to lead. I'm also going to, in the same energy, build you up or build somebody else up. And I'm going to build my staff. I'm going to build a team. I'm going to empower other businesses. I'm going to pour back into my community, Sam Walton. I'm going to give to others to the same degree that I'm pouring into myself. And at the same time, I'm going to spiritually vertically pour and pay attention to my spiritual life as well. Because if I ignore one of those, something's a little off kilter and something's not going to be quite right. So I'll give you an example. There's most common problem that we're seeing in the business world and in society as now is mental health issues. And in particular, there's a lot of language about quietly quitting, a lot of languages about people burning out, all this kind of stuff. And I think part of the reason why people are burning out is number one, one of those dimensions is off. Either they're not pouring into themselves, and so therefore if you don't pour into yourself, if you don't fuel up your trucks, eventually they're going to run out of gas. And eventually it's not going to be effective anymore. And then you can say, well, you can blame the truck and say, it's the truck's fault. You didn't pour into it.
Ain't got no gas in it.
It ain't got no gas. It's common sense, but we're surprised when we run out of gas, but when we don't refuel. So we got to refuel in order to pour out. But it also, part of that refueling is I can refuel naturally and pour out naturally. But if I'm not connected to the source in one way or another, eventually that disconnect is gonna have an effect on some area of my life. It's gonna affect in one way. So three-dimensional is
and
vital.
like the most effective people, basically what you said, are three-dimensional, right? And we've all met one or two dimensional people and go, well, that's kind of unfortunate. It's too bad. You can be even one dimensional in serving your community.
Yep.
Like if you just completely give. And I met people like that, and they are just the most selfless people in the world, but they don't take care of themselves. They don't pour into themselves, and they're not connecting with God and taking care of their spiritual life. So they burn out, they crash, they hurt people trying to help people.
Yep.
Right. And then you have this people who are completely self-absorbed. Well, guess what?
Totally. Mental
health issues and depression, suicide, these things come out like very much out of that because they're missing two other dimensions there.
That's true.
Right.
Well, and so I think a lot of people, watching this, listening to this would be thinking, yeah, but I know somebody they're not spiritual and they're successful and all the rest of it. Here's one thing. And it's true. Like we can for a season, but the ones that are lasting, again, built to last, like ones that are going to last a long time and sustain a long time. There's lots of shooting stars, lots of examples of shooting stars, but the ones that are really make a lasting impact are the ones that pay
they're
attention
around
to all
for
three.
decades and decades and decades. And then I'll even like to point out too, there's the one who has the relationship with God and pours their whole self into it. And the Bible talks about this, and you talk about it in your book. Is like if you're all faith and no works, your faith is dead.
Yeah,
and
that's
I
right
think
in the
that
Bible.
this is a huge. It's biblical, right?
Yeah.
Like and it's like we're supposed to take action.
So in the Christian world, this is one thing where, and this is what I'm speaking to as a pastor, is in the Christian world we get these weird Christians where they're saying it's just me and God. It's all I need is my relationship with God. I don't need anything else. And I was like, come on, like first of all, read the Bible. Adam had just God, and God's like, it's not good for Adam to be alone. He needed more. He needed another dimension to be able to sustain and to provide life. And all of those things are like we realize and saying, hey, if I just get one dimensional, just my relationship with God, I'm going to get weird. Like it's not going to be.
And we've met these people.
And we disconnect from others, or we disconnect from ourselves and going, no, like, hold on.
We don't work on ourselves.
Yeah, we don't work on ourselves. We think that God's just going to automatically hand it to us on a silver platter. No. Like,
He wants us to work on ourselves.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
He wants, like, why give us the earth to subdue and to grow and to build and to care for if he didn't want us to work?
Absolutely.
Right? Like, we're supposed to get out there and work.
Yeah.
And it's a great thing. So I found that super uplifting for me, just because, like we were talking about earlier, in Canada, there can be a little bit of an anti-success culture, where when you're successful, you're wealthy, you're doing well, that, there's like you stepped on other people to get up the ladder kind of.
Yeah, Canadians are kind of like the crab in the bucket. Right?
Yeah,
like
they drag each other down.
We don't. It's somebody, like, a business gets really successful, and this is just the phenomenon that, because I have family both sides of the border, and I'm a dual citizen, and so I observe the differences quite often. And in the States, they celebrate success, and even more importantly, this is something that I find fascinating difference between Canadians and Americans is, I've been invited in by some of the largest churches. I was invited in by an NFL team to sit in all their meetings and all this kind of stuff in the football world. They opened the doors wide open. They weren't scared that I was going to steal anything from them or all that kind of stuff. And they opened it. And the successful in the States are very generous in this way. And likewise, when people see somebody in the US, when they see somebody really succeeding in business, they will do everything they possibly can to learn and to grow and to glean from them and do that. But in Canada, as soon as somebody, and I've noticed this trend, as soon as somebody has success, they suddenly get lonely because nobody's like, oh, I don't want to learn from them. And then we start making excuses as to why they were successful, like why you were successful and this other business wasn't. And they make excuses, and so instead of learning from you and your success, I'm going to make excuses as to why it worked for you. And you just had this line. It was handed to you on a silver platter. You had this and you did it. And you did that. And I'm not going to learn from you because I've just made excuses as to what to justify your success. And instead of pulling on you and saying, I'm going to learn everything I can from you because you've tapped into something, you figure something out, and I can learn from you, I'm going to pull you down.
Yeah. And you know what I wonder, we talked about this in the last podcast as well, is it an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset?
Yep.
Like, is it that Canadians have more of a scarcity mindset and Americans have more of an abundance mindset?
I think that's probably very true.
Definitely part of it.
It's interesting. So the uber wealthy in Canada, most of them you'd never know.
Oh, they hide it.
They hide it. Like, they drive the plane vehicles. But they don't flaunt their wealth, or not to the degree that they would.
No, it's not socially acceptable here.
It's not socially acceptable. And I was like, why isn't that? Because there's some brilliant people that I'd like to learn from, right? And going, well, what did you do and how did you do it? And I think that there is a scarcity, or I don't know. Like, it's a weird thing that I think we just need to get over our excuses.
Yeah, it is. It is an odd little social experiment there. So let's take our job back. The churches and Parallel Church and the movement you're leading, My City Care, Not for Sale, both of the places you guys are doing non-for-profits that are very successful and growing massively right now, which is just awesome to see. They're taking their job back, and that's the drum you're beating and the movement you're trying to get ignited. And it's totally, it's great to be a part of it.
Yeah.
How do you think businesses can be a part of taking their job back?
Well, the premise of the book, the book is written about church history, but there's so much that, I mean, you just read it, and there's so much that you can draw from business wise and apply to life. There's basically three premises of the book. Number one is accept responsibility. So I think every business leader can say, hey, what if I became an ecclesia? What if I became a gathering of citizens who took care of our city? What difference could I make in my neighborhood? What difference could we make in our community? How could we make our community better? I'm going to accept responsibility instead of casting the blame and saying, well, it's city council's responsibility. It's their responsibility. It's the government's got to fix this. Like, what could we do to contribute? Accept responsibility. Number two is, when we accept responsibility, then we're going, well, I'm not big enough. I can't really make a difference. It's not going to make a difference. And it's like, no. Know your identity. Know that you're built to lead. Know that DNA is inside of you, that you can and you should, and that if all of us as citizens took responsibility for our cities, imagine what would happen, and know who we are. And we're a member of the city, so I'm going to know my identity. And then thirdly, instead of asking for solutions, praying for solutions, waiting for someone else to offer the solutions. Why don't we become the solution? And saying, what's the biggest need in our city? That's what we're doing as a church with our, My City Care, not for sale, is rescuing underage children from trafficking, which is a massive thing. And we've got homes in multiple countries now, which is awesome, rescuing children, saying, hey, we see a problem. Like, are we going to stop the whole problem? No, but we can be a solution. My City Care is meeting needs. Like, we see the biggest problem in Lethbridge right now is housing. And so we're stepping in and bought 6 acres of land, and we're building 4 apartment complexes and 20 townhouses, and saying, is that going to solve the entire problem? No, but we're going to choose to be the solution and saying we can do something.
This is what we can do.
This is what we can do. And so we're going to step in and help that. And it's amazing when somebody steps out. And business leaders, when you step out and you accept responsibility, your identity and your purpose and your vision and your mission, and then you choose to be the solution and you make that step out, it's amazing how many people come alongside and saying, I want to be a part of that.
Yeah. I don't know if I know any business owner doesn't want his city to be better.
Yeah.
They all do. But
Absolutely.
Most of them don't know how, or they've made, like you said, they've made excuses, or they haven't seen other people model it. So we as entrepreneurs can lead others to it by stepping out and taking responsibility.
Absolutely. And just see a need, meet a need. Like, there's a need. What if we stepped in? What if we did something? And you watch businesses that do this. They don't have a struggle with business.
No.
I mean, I'm a pastor, so I have to do this, right? So, Jesus said it this way: to the measure you give, to the measure you will receive.
Yeah, I just posted that the other day.
Yeah.
It's shaking and spilling over, I believe. Is how
yeah, shaking and spilling over. So to the measure you give. And that was all in context of instructing his disciples to love their enemies, to bless other people, to do this. And it says, to the measure in which you give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the book talks about it a little bit too. I'm very pro generosity and like talking about it, but it's when we make excuses like, and one of the major ones that everyone loves to do is, well, what are they going to spend it on? What are they going to do with it? What are they? And so then we start cutting back and limiting our generosity and taking away abundance in generosity.
It's excuses again.
Yeah, they're excuses. Yeah. But that's where how you measure is how it'll be measured to you. So if you're going to be stingy, if you're going to cut it back, if you're going to say, I don't trust them with it.
Right.
That's how you're going to be measured. Do you think God's going to trust you with massive resources if you can't trust other people with them?
It's so true.
If you can't give enough, or if you don't have enough, you make, again, whatever your excuses are, you're limiting yourself, and you're limiting God's ability to work through you. And so and true. I love that. And in business and in our movement, not our organization, I'm really, really trying to take steps in that direction. And I think every entrepreneur, when we get into our mission and our vision and what we really want to do, the legacy we want to leave behind, I think if we get into this legacy, that we'll find a massive purpose and fulfillment in
and I just got to say, because you probably won't, but you guys do that already. Like your business is extremely generous on multiple fronts in multiple ways. And I'm constantly in awe of the generosity that you guys step out and do. So kudos to you, but like, you don't just talk it. You do it.
We do what we can, and we try and always to step into it more and more. And God has been faithful and blessed us greatly. And there's, I think, podcast number 4. I sit down with Tim and we talk a little bit about that. But it's very true that the more we lean into it, the more God leans into us and uses us. And that doesn't typically look like what you think it's going to look like, but it's awesome.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So good.
Cool, Kelly. Well, it's been so great. This conversation's been really good. And I really loved your book. It was so nice to read that. And I just love what Parallel's doing, what My City Care is doing. I tell everybody about My City Care. And if you're listening to this and you're an entrepreneur and you want to connect with helping your city, My City Care is an outstanding way to do that. My City Care is, how many locations is it now? It's a lot.
We were in 68 communities last year, and we just added a bunch more this year. Yeah. It's growing very quickly, and really we called it My City Care because it's me taking responsibility for the care of my city.
Yeah, and so if there isn't a My City Care in your city,
absolutely
get a hold of My City Care, and they would love to help you start one.
Absolutely.
small communities, big cities, everything. They're popping up everywhere. Your guys' model for it is a really great way to start. And it's also parallel. It's big C church thought process. And it's not even church thought process. No. It's just city.
It's a movement. And we like, you don't have to cookie cutter it. It's not a franchise. It's, hey, we will help. We'll come alongside, walk with you to help you start the movement in your town.
In the book, again, we're wrapping up here, but in the book, you talk about 6 basic needs that Jesus talks about: food, water, clothing, shelter, health, and justice.
Yep.
That's what My City Care is working toward for that. And it's what Jesus called out in the Bible. This is what the least of these need. And this is what I'm calling you to do.
Said that 2,000 years ago, and those are still the 6
and still the
needs.
Biggest needs of every community. And so My City Care is doing an outstanding job of that. And so if you have a My City Care in your city, reach out to them, connect with them, support with them, come alongside them. This is how you as a business can help make your city better. And if there isn't, get a hold of them and they'll help you get it going. It's just absolutely outstanding. So I love being a part of it. Thanks, Kelly, for coming. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for listening today, Built to Lead listeners. And if this has been valuable to you, if it's added value to you, please share it. Please like, subscribe, connect with us, send us a message. We love hearing from you. Have an awesome week.